Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. One of the men accused of conspiracy to commit murder at the Coots border crossing is denied bail. More details are coming in as to why it took police so long to respond to the mass shooting in an elementary school in Texas, which left 21 people dead. And the Edmonton Oilers advanced to the next round of the playoffs after beating the Calgary Flames in overtime last night. We have reactions from some of the players.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. One of the men accused of conspiracy to commit murder at the Coots border blockade in February was denied bail earlier today. 45-year-old Chris Carbert appeared by video in Lethbridge Court of Queen's Bench to hear the decision after a bail hearing last Friday. Carbert and 3 other men are accused of conspiring to kill police officers at the blockade near Coots. Now, one of the other men, Chris Lysak, was denied bail in March. Anthony Oleniak and Jerry Morin also remain in custody. Now, the Crown says it plans to try the 4 men together. They return to court on June the 13th. Now, Bridge City News cannot release the details of the reasoning for the decision of bail being denied to Carbert due to a court-ordered publication ban. The man who went on a deadly shooting rampage at a Quebec City mosque will be eligible for parole after 25 years in prison. Alexandra Bissonnette pleaded guilty to 6 charges of first-degree murder in the January 17th massacre. The Supreme Court has struck down the criminal code provision that allowed judges to impose consecutive life sentences and parole ineligibility periods in multiple murder cases. The court says it violated the charter guarantee against cruel or unusual treatment because it could deny offenders a realistic possibility of being paroled before they die. Safety officials in the United States are seeking to clarify the timeline and address the anger over the response by law enforcement to the mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. The U.S. Marshal Service says its deputies traveled around 110 kilometers to Uvalde, and the gunman was still inside when they arrived. Parents are demanding to know why officers were not able to stop the shooter much earlier. Officials said 18-year-old Salvador Ramos was in the building for almost an hour before he was shot and killed. During that period of time, he unloaded 100 rounds of ammunition, killing 19 children and 2 teachers. Ontario's police watchdog says a man shot and killed by officers in Toronto was carrying a pellet gun. The Special Investigations Unit says the 27-year-old man was shot by at least 2 officers in the city's East End yesterday. Police were responding to reports of a person with a gun. The Toronto District School Board said 4 schools in the area were temporarily locked down due to the police investigation. You know, it appears as though depression and anxiety are on the rise across North America. Is it from the pandemic, or are there other factors? Pastor Jeff Peabody wrote a book about dealing with anxiety called Perfectly Suited, The Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. Pastor Jeff says when it comes to the struggles with young people today, there are a number of factors which play a role.
Culturally, all the pressure that arises from social media, I think, plays into that. I think there is such an uncertainty about our world and what the future looks like, and I think all of that feeds into just this heightened sense of not being sure of things, and so that all feeds into anxiety, and it's especially high, I think, for younger generations.
Catch the full interview with Pastor Jeff Peabody discussing how Scripture can really help those dealing with anxiety and fear. That Q&A is coming up in the second half of our newscast. Samaritan's Purse is officially on the ground helping in Ottawa after a wild storm ravaged through the city. The organization will be helping specifically with tree and debris removal. Now, Samaritan's Purse says they're working alongside the City of Ottawa to manage all the debris when it comes to clearing people's properties that have been severely damaged. Tammy Suter, relief manager with Samaritan's Purse, says the main problem the city's dealing with right now, power outages.
If you think back to the 2018 tornadoes, they had 80 power poles that were down that they had to replace. With this response, they have 240. So it's significant across the city where the tornadoes were just kind of pockets of places that kind of got hit. And then the wind kind of swept across the city, and so you kind of got from one end to the other in varying degrees of devastation. And so where we are at the Metropolitan Church right here, this is probably one of the hardest hit areas. Again, we're still without power here, but we're only about 10 minutes from the community that we're going to be working in.
10 people lost their lives when the storm blew through parts of Ontario and Quebec. The Manitoba government says it hopes to soon reopen a stretch of the main highway between Winnipeg and the U.S. border. Flooding caused by the swollen Red River closed the section of Highway 75 for close to a month now. The province says the water has started to recede. There's no firm date, however, for reopening the highway because of a structural review and safety inspection needs to be done first. Premiers from Western Canada are asking the Trudeau Liberals to come to the table to discuss providing more money for health care. BC Premier John Horgan says the recent COVID-19 pandemic made medical services unsustainable. He says provinces are really struggling to add more levels of care and current needs are not being met.
The Prime Minister repeatedly said when we get past the pandemic will be the best time to have those conversations. Well, we're here today. The pandemic is waning. It's becoming endemic, and it's time now to have that conversation. For the past 6 months, we've been trying to get a path forward to a negotiation about how we can best deliver these mutual concerns. And I'm uniquely situated as someone who has been testing the various components of the public health care system over the past 8 months, from diagnostic through the primary care system to a discovery of a cancer, to surgery, to post-op, to radiation treatment, and then the accompanying therapies thereafter. I know the strain on the faces of healthcare workers in my community, and I know that's duplicated across the country.
The Western Premiers meeting in Regina is the first in-person conference since the pandemic began. Conservative leadership hopeful Jean Charest says if he was elected Prime Minister, he would not stay neutral on Quebec's controversial French language protection law should a legal challenge reach the Supreme Court.
This is provincial jurisdiction. We all get that. We understand that. If this bill goes in front of the Supreme Court of Canada, my government will speak to it, as I have said for Bill 21, which, by the way, tonight, interesting in the debate, Mr. Poilievre's position in French in Quebec was that he wouldn't fight the bill in the Supreme Court of Canada. And I'm not even sure from his answer tonight, because he's so slippery, on what he said exactly.
So you wouldn't just speak to it, you would fight it, should it get to that point?
My government will speak to our jurisdictions, to the issues that are relevant to the government of Canada in front of the Supreme Court of the country. My government will not be neutral on the future or a piece of legislation in the Supreme Court. If our jurisdictions are part of the debate, which is the case, well then we'll speak. Now, am I the one who's going to go out there and provoke court action? The answer is no.
Well, we enjoyed some more moisture here again today in Lethbridge. We may also be seeing more moisture again soon. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek of the forecast. Jeanette, maybe slightly cooler temperatures and more showers on the way for the weekend?
Well, it looks like that shower activity could be holding off until Monday now, Hal, with temperatures hovering pretty close to seasonal over the weekend. We're looking at highs of 18 degrees for both Saturday and Sunday. Pretty windy conditions as well. This evening, we're looking at winds from the west gusting up to 70 kilometers per hour. Into Saturday, those gusts will be at about 40 kilometers per hour. Now, as for that rain, I will have all those details coming up for you later on in the newscast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The province announced that Albertans can now bring their dogs to restaurant patios. Government officials say restaurants and coffee shops no longer need to get approval from a public health inspector so patrons can dine with their dogs. Non-service dogs are allowed on patios only and must not pass through any indoor food handling or dining areas. Dogs must be kept on a leash or in a carrier. Service dogs are allowed in both indoor and outdoor dining areas. The Alberta government announced that the highway construction season has begun. Close to $1.4 billion is being spent on 300 capital and highway improvement projects. The province says this should create around 12,000 jobs. Some of the major projects include twinning the west side of Highway 19, twinning and a new bridge for Highway 15, and replacing the deck on the Peace River Bridge. As for our region here in southern Alberta, the Highway 3 twinning project is expected to begin next year. The province also announced a $20 million investment into the Alberta legislature to create new water features, walkways, and decking. The federal government announced it too will be contributing to the renovations at the ledge.
Today, I'm proud to announce that the Government of Canada is investing $8 million to support the active transportation project on the Alberta legislature grounds. And that means that people like Willow, her brother, and Merlin, who's sitting over there very obediently, will be able to enjoy the legislature grounds even more. And so it's improvements to the walking paths and the decking. This project is going to ensure that Edmontonians and visitors can enjoy this landmark for years to come.
Could Canada become the next country to land on the moon? Dr. David Naylor from the University of Lethbridge seems to think so. The university has received a $100,000 grant from the Canadian Space Agency, along with 22 other post-secondaries across the country. Dr. Naylor says it's all about investing in the students.
We've been given funding from different grants for equipment. We have 4 industrial partners that are contributing upwards of $2 million. And this piece of the puzzle is for training of students. So these students will be high school students, possibly. We have had some in the past. Undergraduate students, graduate students, and so forth. So we're training the next generation of bright minds on the technology that will be required to tackle the problems that will be coming down the pipes in the coming years.
Dr. Naylor will have more on the work they're doing at the U of L in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. Walkers will be stepping out for a great cause on Saturday morning. The Walk for Alzheimer's event is raising funds to support programs and services in the community that helps those who are battling the disease. The event has raised $100,000 so far, with a $300,000 goal. Lindsay Burnham with the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta says over 50,000 people have been diagnosed in Alberta and the Northwest Territories. She says raising money and awareness of Alzheimer's is vital.
So what we always say is that we provide help for today, but we also provide hope for tomorrow, and that's through the research. So these funds are really important to our organization because we're not a government-funded organization. We get a very small amount of government support through some various grants, but the bulk of the support we receive is from individuals who do this type of fundraising. So it's really important that the community kind of rally behind the cause and do this fundraising for us so that we can help all the individuals along the journey.
The walk starts at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow by Henderson Lake at the east side parking lot near the Nikiyuko Japanese Garden, and there's no fee to register. Well, the Lethbridge Corn Maze's popular goat snuggling activity is officially underway. It's a special time for guests and families to enjoy some one-on-one time with baby goats. As Angela Stewart explains now, the snuggles can be a great form of therapy.
The Lethbridge Corn Maze have opened their doors early for the season and are welcoming guests to come down and enjoy some fun activities, including goat snuggling.
We do have our farm open with the petting zoo. We have goat snuggling going on that people can book their own sessions and come for an hour and spend time with the goats.
Quite the popular activity at the Corn Maze. Goat snuggling sessions have been taking place for the last 3 years here.
We started, the first year of COVID, I guess. And since that time, it's been very successful and people love to come out.
I'm always looking for something fun to do, especially outdoors. Super calm. They've been sleeping on us, so it's definitely relaxing.
Considered to be a very fun and playful kid, the baby goats have also been known to be a therapy animal.
We actually have heard that several people have come here and said this was so relaxing. And one lady, I remember last year, she said she doesn't go to therapy, she just comes to the goat snuggling.
Well, if you're just looking for some family fun and you want to snuggle a goat for an hour, or you need a good therapy option because you're upset like me that the Calgary Flames lost to the Edmonton Oilers in Game 5 last night, goat snuggling sessions are available here at the Lethbridge Corn Maze. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Oh, Angela, I can definitely relate to that, yes, after the Flames got knocked out. Bring me one of those goats, will you? I'm not kidding around. Now, as for the Corn Maze itself, and you want to walk through it, that'll officially open on July the 29th. A new exhibition at the Galt Museum and Archives is taking a deep dive into how trees really help us on a daily basis. The new area opens on Saturday. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, Indigenous and Western scientific perspectives are featured, along with intricate paintings of some spectacular trees.
It's a little bit different than sometimes the way you see trees represented in museums or natural history places.
When you walk into the Discovery Hall at the Galt Museum and Archives, you'll notice the beautiful paintings of trees featured in the newest exhibition called Rooted How Trees Give Us Life. All of the pieces of art are from the mind of local artist April Mattis.
For the paintings in this exhibition, what I really wanted to do was to not so much as illustrate or have a sort of a diagram of a tree, but rather produce images that were more about being with trees and the sort of emotional response one might feel.
The curator for the Galt Museum, Tyler Stewart, says the exhibition explores the balance between Western science and Indigenous knowledge when it comes to trees.
We see trees around our neighborhood, but we kind of take them for granted, I think, a lot of the time. So remembering that there's a value to our urban forests, but also that, our river valley is rich in trees, and that's that cottonwood species, and thinking about, where these species came from.
A tree fort and miniature rock climbing wall were also installed for kids and adults alike.
Remember what it's like that trees are for play as well as for shade and for cleaning the air and all those other things as well.
The new exhibition, Rooted, How Trees Give Us Life, will be on display at the Galt Museum and Archives until September 4th. For Birch City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
New exhibits are being set up at museums in California and Ohio, celebrating the upcoming 100th birthday of Charles Schulz, the man who created the comic strip Peanuts. Now, at its height in popularity, Peanuts ran in more than 2,600 newspapers around the world.
This was somebody who took his art very seriously and was very conscious of writing and drawing and using the devices, the mechanisms that the comic strip gives you in ways that were effective to communicate whatever idea it was he was trying to communicate. My desire with this exhibition, which is to celebrate the centennial of Schulz's birth, is for everybody to go away learning something. To think, oh, I didn't know that about Schulz. In Peanuts, all of the girls play all of the sports. And he did a whole week of comic strips about Title IX. People were telling his daughters they couldn't do this kind of stuff because they were girls. And he knew they could do it. There was no reason because of their gender that they couldn't do it. And so let's just do it. A California homemaker wrote to Mr. Schulz and suggested that he add a black child to the Peanuts gang. They thought it would mean a great deal to little black boys and girls to see somebody like them in the strip. And this is the first Sunday page in which Franklin appears. And here, visitors can read several of the letters that led up to the introduction of Franklin.
Charlie Brown, Lucy, Linus, Snoopy, Peppermint Patty, some great memories growing up with the Peanuts comic strip. I also grew up watching the Battle of Alberta, like you may have as well, and we just had the first one in 31 years. Now, in the round, the Edmonton Oilers came out on top as Oilers captain Connor McDavid scored the overtime winner, beating the Calgary Flames and closing out their playoff series in 5 games.
Definitely wasn't our best effort, but we stuck in there. Got great performances from a bunch of different guys, and just happy to contribute on a night where maybe didn't have my best. Obviously special to win. I think that's obviously everything. It was real fun. The fans were amazing in both buildings, especially in Edmonton. Just the energy and the vibe around the city has been amazing.
He's everything to us. He's our leader. He's our go-to guy. He's the guy that everyone looks up to when you need him, right? And he's done it all season. He's done it all his career. He's last 2 months or last month or whatever it has been. He's been amazing for us. So eventually you just kind of run out of words. So I'll just leave it at that.
It's disappointing because we had a really, really good season. We have a really great team. I think we all believed that we had a deep run in us, and obviously you can't put it all on us. You got to give Edmonton credit. I thought they played really well. I thought their big guys played some big series. They had some depth.
The Oilers will now play the winner of the Colorado-St. Louis series. The Avs lead that best-of-7 affair 3-2. Well, we had a little bit of rain today, but it appears as though a nice weekend is shaping up. Full weather details are on deck. We had some more rain today, but it should be clearing up just in time for the weekend. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, is it true that our farmers and ranchers may have to wait a little bit longer for some more shower activity?
Yeah, Hal, that is true. It was initially looking like showers would be present this weekend, but it looks like that moisture is going to hold off now until at least Monday. Mainly seasonal conditions too this weekend. So Saturday, we're looking at a high of 18 degrees. Winds from the west gusting up to 40 kilometers per hour. Sunday, mainly cloudy skies, 18 degrees. Going to build up that moisture there Sunday evening into Monday. That's when we're looking at that rain. 13 degrees the high for Monday, up to 17 on Tuesday with sunshine. 20 degrees on Wednesday, and then up to 21 degrees on Thursday. So yeah, that moisture is definitely going to push the temperature down below seasonal. Average high for this time of year is 20 degrees. Average low, 6 degrees. 31 was our high temperature. That's where we were at back in 1986. And in 2005 on this day, we had our coldest on record, which was -2. 5:33 is when the sun woke up this morning and our sun set this evening. 9:24 p.m. Getting close to that 16-hour mark. So we're looking at 15 hours and 51 minutes of daylight today. So there's some shower activity happening in Victoria tomorrow. 30% chance of showers, 14 degrees the high, 15 the high in Vancouver. Clearing up for mainly cloudy skies tomorrow. 21 the high in Edmonton tomorrow, partly cloudy skies, and a high of 18 in Calgary with the winds gusting 20 to 40 kilometers per hour there. So as we look to the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon's going to be seeing a 60% chance of showers, looking at a risk of a thunderstorm there. 23 the high, 24 the high in Regina, mix of sun and clouds. Winnipeg sitting at 24 degrees. Could see some shower activity, then it's going to clear up and make for a sunny day tomorrow. In the central region of the country, we're looking at a high of 22 in Toronto with partly cloudy skies. Ottawa seeing a high of 22 in showers. Montreal going to be seeing some shower activity as well in the morning and a risk of a thunderstorm. As we look to Atlantic Canada, this is where we see Fredericton, 22 degrees the high, seeing 5 to 10 millimeters of rain expected there. Risk of a thunderstorm. Halifax could see some shower activity as well. 20 the high there. 21 in Charlottetown tomorrow with rain, and 2 to 4 millimeters of rain expected tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland, with a high of 5 degrees. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The United States has won the latest round of a legal battle to seize a $325 million Russian-owned superyacht in Fiji. The case now appears headed to the Pacific nation's top court. Fiji's Court of Appeal dismissed an appeal by Faisal Hanif, who represents the company that illegally owns the yacht called Amadea. The case highlights the thorny legal issues as the United States tries to seize assets of Russian oligarchs linked to the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia is pressing the West to lift sanctions over the war in Ukraine, seeking to shift the blame of a growing food crisis. The Russian invasion limited Ukraine's ability to ship millions of tons of grain and other agricultural products. According to the Kremlin, Russian President Vladimir Putin told Italy's Prime Minister that Russia would help with grain exports if and only the sanctions are lifted. Britain accused Moscow of trying to hold the world ransom and insisted there would be no sanctions relief. Russia's war in Ukraine is now in its 4th month. Japan is opening its borders to foreign tourists in June for the first time since imposing tight pandemic travel restrictions around 2 years ago. It will only open to package tours for now. Government officials say Japan will allow the entry of people on tours with fixed schedules and guides beginning on June the 10th. Tourists from areas with low COVID-19 infection rates who have received 3 vaccine doses will be exempt from testing and quarantine upon entry. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 216 points on the day to finish at 20,748. The Dow was up 575 points to 33,212. The S&P 500 was up 100 points to 4158. And the Nasdaq was up 390 on the day to 12,131. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.04 to $115.13 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was down 17 cents to $8.72 U.S. Gold was up $3.09 to $18.53.72 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up a dime to $22.11 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $16.05 per bushel, barley's at $10.23, canola's at $26.99, and corn is at $12.31 per bushel. Live cattle were down 23 cents to $132.18. Feeder cattle August contract was down 35 cents to $165.68, and lean hogs were down 70 cents to 109.58. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.62 US. Recapping one of our top stories, one of the men accused of conspiracy to commit murder at the Coutts border blockade in February was denied bail earlier today. 45-year-old Chris Carbert faces charges of possession of weapons, mischief to property over $5,000, and uttering death threats. He's also charged with obstructing the use of Highway 4 near the Coutts and U.S. border on February the 14th. Well, it appears as though anxiety and depression levels are on the rise, especially with our young people. Coming up, Pastor Jeff Peabody explains how Scripture can help. Details are in this new book called Perfectly Suited, the Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. Pastor Jeff will have details shortly. But first, here's a look at some of the special events happening right here in southwestern Alberta.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Come out and support a worthy cause. The Kidney Foundation of Canada is holding a virtual kidney walk on Sunday, June 5th. Walk in your neighborhood and join online for a celebration across Western Canada. While walking different paths, this virtual fundraiser unites all who take part in support of finding a cure for kidney disease. To register and for more information, visit kidneywalk.ca. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 6 to 7 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
You know, with all of the pressures of the world today, it seems that the number of people struggling with both anxiety and depression is on the rise. So how can we effectively deal with this? Where can we go for help? Today's guest may have some answers for us. Jeff Peabody is the founding pastor of New Day Church in Federal Way, Washington, and he's also author of the book, Perfectly Suited, the Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. Pastor Jeff, welcome to Bridge City News.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's a privilege to be here.
Now let's talk a bit about anxiety and depression. Now these are things you've dealt with personally. When did you first realize that you were struggling?
Honestly, I was pretty disconnected from my emotions much of my life. I really was not very aware of what was going on inside of me. I think maybe that's a typical male. But even when you can't access your feelings, they're still happening. And eventually they're going to find a way to make their way out. And it was like my brain and my body decided that they were going to find a way to get my attention. And for me, that meant I kind of hit this emotional and mental wall where everything just sort of began to crumble. And I found myself just bombarded and flooded with all these intrusive thoughts, and I couldn't stop my mind. It just kept spinning. And I didn't realize at the time that was kind of classic symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, which is an anxiety disorder. So I did not know what to do with this. And it's scary when you're frightened of your own mind. And I didn't know what to do. And so I went on a walk with a friend of mine who happens to be a counselor. And as we're walking along, and I'm so baffled, and I'm just I'm crying, and which is also uncharacteristic of me. And I make this statement. I said, I'm not an anxious person. And he laughed, and it totally caught me up short. I was not expecting that at all, and it made me realize, I'm not as self-aware as I thought I was. And that sort of began a long journey of me right up till today of beginning to recognize more of what's been going on inside for me.
Now, you're right that you wanted to be a very strong Christian most of the time, but that you felt guilty. Where did that guilt come from?
I was raised in a devout Christian home, and I'm really grateful for that upbringing. But I think anybody that's been raised in the faith knows how difficult it is as a kid to make the distinction between messages of grace and the gospel and the messages about behavior, good behavior, and what a good Christian looks and acts like. And I think for me, I began to internalize this pressure of wanting to earn approval and live up to what was expected of me. And I always had a sort of a hyperactive conscience as a kid. But then I think as an adult, as Christians, we can easily fall into that sensation of wanting to please God and also wondering if he really is, and we lose sight of the gospel message that he's pleased with Christ. And if we're in Christ, then we have that for our protection.
You know, I think when we get anxious or depressed, we're really hesitant to reach out for help. We say, you know what, I've got this covered. I can do it on my own. But no man or woman is an island, correct?
Right. And I think especially for us as Christians, we can have that added spiritual layer to it where we go, oh, it's wrong for me to feel this way. And it's a sign of my faith not being strong enough, or maybe I feel like I'm sinning because the Bible says don't be anxious. And so we compound people's pain with the added layer of guilt and feeling like if I was a good Christian, I wouldn't even feel this way.
Now, the Bible refers to spiritual attacks on Christians. How would you define spiritual warfare, and how can we really recognize if the anxiety and mental health struggles are spiritual in nature?
You know, spiritual warfare is one of those topics that Christians tend to go one or two ways. Either we just ignore it or don't want to acknowledge that it's a thing at all, or we go the other way and start to see a demon behind every tree, and every little crisis we're experiencing we attribute to some sort of spiritual attack. And as I was going through my own anxiety, I went through all those things of going, well, is this a sign of either me sinning or something more sinister going on spiritually? And I think at the end of the day, the cause is less significant than the fact of when we're feeling afflicted and that we need God's mercy. And so I tend to just define spiritual warfare as really anything that has a negative effect on our spirits. That the devil can use whatever's going on in our life, whether he caused it or not. And we do have definite spiritual enemy, but it really doesn't matter what the source of that attack is, because it can be used against us by the devil.
Now, Pastor Jeff, in the Bible, Scripture tells us to always put on the armor of God. But many of us aren't exactly sure what that means or how to apply this to our daily lives in the battle against anxiety and fear. Can you explain?
Yeah, the ironic thing, I think, about the armor when we generally conceive of it is that it becomes one more thing that we need to do correctly. And so we start to think of, well, how am I supposed to put this on? And really the Greek word there in Ephesians for putting it on can also be translated as to sink into, which I find a very different image because that requires so much less effort of my own doing, and I can just instead rest in what God has provided for me in this armor. And that's really what he's saying, is that the protection is provided by him. It's not something that we're generating on our own.
In our family, we have a lot of millennials and Gen Z people, and a lot of these people struggle with anxiety and depression on an incredible level right now. Why do you think so many of our young people are struggling today with both anxiety and depression?
That is a really good question. I think it is a very much pronounced sensation for the younger generations. I think culturally, all the pressure that arises from social media, I think, plays into that. I think there is such an uncertainty about our world and what the future looks like, and I think all of that feeds into just this heightened sense of not being sure of things, and so that all feeds into anxiety, and it's especially high, I think, for younger generations.
You know, it's interesting. When I was a kid playing football and just in high school and then college afterwards, we used to have the expression, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But it seems like names today are really hurting people, and they're having a profound impact on people's lives.
Yes, it is. It really is true that words have a much greater impact. And it's interesting in the book of Revelation when it gets to the end, and Jesus assigns a name to each of us that only he knows and only we know, and that idea of care for our identity and Christ's restoration of that to us, because there's so much right now that just we're pulling each other down, and so yes, I'm grateful that God is concerned, even when we feel like, oh, we shouldn't have these things, shouldn't bother us. He cares about the things that really do cut deep.
He cares about the little things and the big things. Pastor Jeff, in your book, you talk about God's will for us not to move at all or to move slowly. Why is it so important to maybe slow down in life?
I have always had the kind of personality where if I read in Scripture of what God's ultimate goal for me is, where He would like me to get to, then a lot of times I can start to feel like if I'm not quite there yet, then I must be failing, or I'm outside of God's will. And one of the things that's really helped me is to look at the incarnation of Jesus and go out, yes, of course, his salvation of us through the cross is God's ultimate plan for his life. And yet he had to go through all of life. He had to go through the growing up and adolescence and becoming an adult. And all of that was fully within God's will. And it made me realize God has room. It's good to have process. It's not just the end result of things. And so to allow the process to be what it is, I think, and especially even when we look at Jesus on the cross right there, where the biggest thing he did was not leave the cross. He stayed right where he was, as excruciating as everything was that was happening. And so I think that idea of it, sometimes it feels very uncomfortable to not be constantly moving forward, but to recognize that God is at work in the whole process.
Now, you write that you've worn the weight of Christian duty heavily. What exactly do you mean by that, and how has this really impacted your faith journey?
Yeah, the whole concept of responsibility for me, what am I supposed to do, has been a mantle that's been heavy on my shoulders a lot. And sometimes that can take you out of the room entirely of relationship or I like to phrase it this way, that I've often been more concerned about living a sinless life than living as a forgiven person. Because I think if we can settle into the idea that God loves us and forgives us, then we can go, well, if I really believe that's true, then I'm going to be more forgiving towards other people. If I believe that God loves me, I'm not going to be as judgmental of other people. I'm going to be able to have more room and capacity for that. So I think being able to not frame it up so much in terms of duty and responsibility, instead live out of being loved by God, is liberating for me.
So, Pastor Jeff, how does entrusting God with all of these aspects of our lives function as a shield?
Well, I think it gets back to Christ, because when I am anxious about myself and I begin adopting all my normal, what I call the armor of me, all these feelings, defenses that I'm gonna try to make myself okay, I always have in the back of my mind that little wondering question: am I actually doing enough that God's going to be satisfied with this? But when I can step back and go, Christ always pleases his Father, and what he did on the cross can't be undone, and I decide to embrace that fully and let that be my protection, and then that serves as a shield. And I know that no matter what happens, no matter how I fall or fail, that I am safe because God is always pleased with Jesus.
Now, you make an interesting statement here that says, it's an illusion that a life of trusting God equals fewer problems. Can you explain?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's always the expectation that well, if I'm really living the Christian life properly, that God is going to eliminate some of the normal things that I would assume he takes away when we're within his will. And that's really just not the case. I mean, look at the life of Jesus and the suffering he went through. But we still can get that in our heads mentally that that's what it should mean. And then we get surprised when bad things happen and we feel like faith isn't working then when really God is demonstrating his presence with us in the midst of the hard things that we're going through.
So what do you really hope readers will discover from reading your book?
I think a couple of things. First off, if somebody is experiencing anxiety and depression, I think I would hope they would feel encouraged as they read it that they're not alone, that it's okay to seek help, and also just to go. These feelings are not sinful feelings. To take that load of guilt out of the picture, and also just to find it freeing and unburdening to look at the armor of God through a different lens and see how it's a gift to us and not another thing that we have to do to be a proper Christian.
Jeff Peabody is the author of Perfectly Suited, The Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today from just outside of Seattle, Washington.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, the University of Lethbridge has received a $100,000 grant from the Canadian Space Agency to train the next generation of space scientists. The U of L is one of 21 post-secondary institutions in the country to receive a grant through the CSA's Flights and Fieldwork for the Advancement of Science and Technology Funding Initiative. It's a mouthful, but joining me now to discuss this is Dr. David Naylor. He is the physics and astronomy professor and the head of the Astronomical Instrumentation Group at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Naylor, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Okay, awesome. So, Dr. Naylor, this is big, exciting news for the university and for Canada, I would say, but I'm going to let you explain what this grant is for exactly because it's kind of a mouthful. So in a nutshell, it's to train the next generation of space scientists in the development of what, a cryogenic something?
Yes. So most of your viewers may know that Canada is going to be going to the moon on a project called the Lunar Gateway. And the Canadian Space Agency has joined forces with NASA to on this project that will see a Canadian be the second nation on the boots on the ground on the moon. So someone in school today will be a Canadian who will have be only the second nation to step foot on the moon, which is really exciting. And so the Canadian Space Agency funds development in technology so that you mitigate the risk. So things that space is risk, that's all it is as a, and you have to mitigate that. And you need to train the next generation of students who become scientists in the technology that will be needed for the future generations. So that's what this is all about. And we're particularly targeting technology that has a path to the moon and some other experiments that we're dealing with as well.
That's incredible news. It's very exciting. And so what will this grant money do exactly? What will the U of L do with it?
So when you do research, there are two things you look at. One is getting the equipment, the infrastructure, the hardware. And the second is the money to train students. And so we've been given funding from different grants for equipment. We have 4 industrial partners that are contributing upwards of $2 million. And this piece of the puzzle is for training of students. So these students will be high school students, possibly. We have had some in the past, undergraduate students, graduate students, and so forth. So we're training the next generation of bright minds on the technology that will be required to tackle the problems that will be coming down the pipes in the coming years.
That's amazing. So maybe paint a picture for me. So what will the students and researchers be able to do because of this grant and this program?
So most people don't realize that the moon in some ways is actually harder than Mars as an environment. Mars is really about a temperature of minus 50 degrees, minus 60 degrees Celsius. So Antarctica is actually colder than Mars, but the moon gets significantly colder around 200 Celsius, minus 200 Celsius, and that is because of its orbit, and it's sheltered. The night on the moon is 14 Earth days. So it means that surviving lunar night is a real challenge, and you have to have instrumentation that's checked out to do that. And we have the largest cryogenic test facility, which is kind of like an enormous beer fridge. I mean, it gets much colder, much faster, but it cools to temperatures that nowhere else can be achieved really for the volume that we have. So we can in principle cool a small rover, a medium rover, and a nano rover in our cryogenic facilities. So students will be exposed to the technology that is associated with this kind of work. Basically, when you put things, if you get a glass of pop and put an ice cube in it, it cracks, it shatters. That thermal gradient just causes the ice cube to crack when you have a pop from the fridge. And pretty much everything you cool to these temperatures breaks. The optical, thermal, electrical, mechanical properties, everything, the properties of everything just fail as you get to extremely low temperatures. And so you must be able to design systems that will survive extreme cooling. And that's what we're doing.
Interesting.
The CSA calls it the Flights and Fieldwork for Space Technology, but the acronym is FAST. It's a very nice acronym. It's basically you have to simulate a space environment. And we're one of the few labs in Canada that can really do that.
This project must simulate a realistic space environment. So what does that look like in terms of what the students will be doing in the lab at the U of L? Can you maybe give us some examples?
It looks like a big metal tank. You can imagine it as a submarine. When you go in a submarine, it takes some time to get down to the bottom of the ocean. And you can stay there for a long time, but you must be careful when you ascend. You can't come up too quickly or you will get the bends. And it's similar in the sense that when you cool down, like the ice cube in the glass of pop, if you cool down too quickly, the ice cube will shatter. And so we have got to go down to extremely low temperatures, and we can stay there pretty much indefinitely, which is just surprising. And we can get 10 times colder than anywhere in the universe can be. With our cryostat, we can actually get down to 0.3 Kelvin. So it takes a long time to get down there, but then we can stay there. And our record is almost a couple of months staying at that low temperature. And the problem, like a submarine, if you forget to take your toothpaste, then you're stuck because you've got to wait to come up. So when we cool things, we've got to be absolutely sure that we have everything in the cryostat that we will need as we go down. So it's meticulous work, it's careful work, and we're pretty good at what we do here. So we're training the next generation of students in this technology.
Okay, so Dr. Naylor, is this cryogenic tank actually physically at the University of Lethbridge then, or is it off-site somewhere?
No. It's on the top level of the new science building. So we have to be on the top level because we need a lot of compressors to cool it. So they're in the penthouse, and so we're on level 9 in the science building, and it was designed fit for purpose. So this is the first time we've had a lab that's been equipped specifically for this task.
That's absolutely incredible. So this new type of spectrometer has been identified by the world's leading space agencies like NASA, right, as a necessary step to explore the galaxy. Can you explain why?
It gets tricky pretty quickly, but we now know so when you explore the universe, you look at different wavelengths, different colors. So with your eye, you can see the planets out there tonight, but it turns out that most of the energy emitted by the universe is detected in the infrared. that's beyond the limit of human vision. And so you need certain types of detectors and certain types of instrumentation. And the physics is complex, but it boils down to the fact that you have to cool your detectors to extremely low temperatures to work. And then you've got competing contrasting requirements. You would like to cover a full spectral band, a broad spectral band. So if you were thinking about the rainbow of colors, you've got green through to yellow through to red, you've got the whole rainbow. And at the same time, you might want to know, well, is it, lemon yellow, or is it a bolder yellow within the color range? And so the task is to cover a broad spectral range at very high spectral resolution. And that's a challenge. And so the space agencies have realized that this a hybrid technology is going to be required. And NASA has identified this, the European Space Agency, with whom we do a lot of work as well. They know that this is the route to go. And so it's on the technology gap. Every year, NASA publishes a technology gap review. Where are we missing in technology? And then the world scientists like ourselves try to fill in those gaps as best we can. So yeah, I think we know Einstein said the smartest person is the one who poses the right question, not whether you can answer it. The right question is that we need this type of instrument, and now we're trying to develop the instrument, which is well on the path, and we need to train the next generation of students in how to use it, really.
Okay, so we've pretty much determined that this is an important step in the future of space exploration. So could something like this reduce future mission risk and cost then?
Well, yes. I mean, space is all about risk. I mean, you don't get into this game if you're risk averse. So you have to make sure you've got redundancy, full redundancy. So whenever we launch anything, you make sure that there are ways that you can reprogram it. You basically carry two of everything: 2 lasers, 2 detectors, 2 drives, to whatever it is. You have redundancy, and then you also have a redundancy in your hardware, your firmware, and so you can reprogram and reconfigure the spacecraft should there be problems. And so what you don't want to do, and I've been involved in space for 4 decades. I worked at the European Space Agency. What you don't want to do is to launch something and then find out, oh, it doesn't work, and here's why. And we've been in those positions. And so you do as much testing, soaking as you can, and you try. And now the requirement is you must test in a realistic space condition, and that's the new space driver, that you must be able to show that you can evaluate the performance of your instrument in the conditions that it's going to experience once it gets out there. And that is what we do. So we can generate. We've got one of the most realistic space simulators in Canada because of the low temperature side. Many people can generate a high vacuum, but we have high vacuum and extremely low temperatures, and that's precisely what is going to be needed to reduce the risk. So we need to identify problems on the ground where we have a chance of fixing them and redesigning them before we launch a $10 billion thing, and then we find out, oh yeah, we should have thought about that.
So Dr. Naylor, has the University of Lethbridge taken part in any such study or project before? Like, maybe you can explain in what ways the U of L has shaped space exploration in the past, or is this a first for the university?
The University of Lethbridge, our group's been funded by the Canadian Space Agency for almost 20 years. We've been funded by ESA as well, and also NASA, actually. We have an instrument that flew on the U-2 aircraft, Earth EO2 aircraft. So we're pretty old hands at this. And we built up the technology over, as I say, over several decades to become really the leading cryogenic space facility in Canada.
That's amazing. Has Canada had much involvement in influencing space exploration?
You know, that's yes and no. We're a small country, really, and so the tax base is small. So our space agency does not get the kind of funding that NASA does, for sure. Europe, the countries in Europe joined together to form the European Space Agency, and you have, I forget the number, but it's probably 15 countries, maybe more, and they each chip in, and then they do big things. Japan does it on its own. Russia did it on its own. China does it on its own. So Canada can't do it on its own. We just don't have the resources to do it. But there are a lot of really talented scientists and engineers in Canada. And what happens is that NASA and ESA invite us to join their teams. So Canada gets involved in space because of the expertise and excellence that exists in the professors in universities across Canada. And it's interesting because we have ties with Europe and America, we actually get involved with both agencies. I've worked with NASA and with ESA, and sometimes NASA and ESA don't work well together, but we're in a kind of a neat position that we can join forces with both, and we get invited to. So we've been invited to participate in a mission that is being considered by NASA.
That is extremely, extremely cool. How much time do you think it will be before a Canadian steps foot on the moon?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Canada joined into the Lunar Gateway project. So Prime Minister Trudeau committed $2 billion to that effort. And in return for supporting that work, Canada gets a flight to the moon for a Canadian. So the second nationality to step foot on the moon will not be Russian or Chinese. Well, I mean, perhaps it could be, but it is going to be a Canadian after Americans, which is really kind of exciting. We don't actually know yet. The Artemis project is going to go back, and they're thinking probably 2025. And when the Canadian will be there, it's not clear. There will be a launch slot and a seat on the spacecraft, but it really will be a big thing for Canada.
Oh, it's giving me chills just thinking about it. Dr. Naylor, thanks so much for joining me today, and all the best in this study.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Dr. David Naylor is a physics and astronomy professor and head of the Astronomical Instrumentation Group at the University of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.